Welcome and thank you for coming to our webinar today. I hope everyone is having a nice week so far. Today we are honored to have Michael Smith from Mutual Boiler with us presenting XPages and jQuery DataTables, simplifying view creation while maximizing functionality. This webinar is brought to you as part of the free monthly webinar series from Team Studio and TLCC. My name is Courtney. I'm here representing Team Studio and helping to run this webinar. Howard Greenberg and Paul Delanebbia from TLCC are joining me on this webinar today, and the three of us are your hosts. We're going to give a quick intro, then we'll give Michael the floor for his presentation. Here at Team Studio, we provide software tools for notes application development and management. We're celebrating our 20th year in business this year. Some of our most well-known tools are Configurator, Chow, and Analyzer, and we are continuing to update these products. We released edition 32.0 over the summer, and we're currently working on a new project that we're very excited to share with everyone at the end of this month. For more information on any of our tools, visit teamstudio.com. So now I'd like to introduce IBM champion Howard Greenberg from TLCC. I am passing the mic over to you now, Howard.
Oh, thank you, Courtney. Let me just get my screen showing here. Okay, good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So my name is Howard Greenberg with TLCC, and along with my partner, Paul Delanebbia. Paul, say hello.
Good day, everyone, and thanks for joining us at our webinar here.
We're going to be your hosts for today. Before we get started, just a little bit about TLCC. Most of you are probably aware of us. We've been in business since 1997. We started off doing Notes and Domino self-paced courses that you take using your Notes client, Domino Designer, or Domino Administrator client. We've been doing a lot of XPages courses since XPages came out, and we have 7 XPages courses, 2 specialized Java courses, a JavaScript course, and several others. Our best-selling courses are our free Introduction to XPages development. So if you're joining us today and haven't really started with XPages, I invite you to go to our website and try that out. We also currently have a fall sale going on. We extended that to the end of October, so you can definitely save a fair amount of money. You can use the link on the screen there, tlcc.com/fall sale, and save a lot of money. Paul and I have been very busy the last couple of years doing a lot of development work with our customers and clients. So we've kind of been specializing in converting Notes apps to the web and mobile using XPages and Bootstrap. We've also been taking some of the older Domino web apps that were done in the R5 days and converting those to XPages as well and modernizing them. One of the things we've done a lot of work on is interfacing with back-end data systems, relational databases, and being that Paul and I kind of started as instructors, we're real good at transferring skills to our clients' personnel as we do our development work. So if you're interested in learning more about that, just contact Paul or myself, and we'd love to talk to you about what we can do for you. Just some upcoming webinars we have coming up. We have confirmed date, and you can register for the November webinar. We're going to have 2 IBMers, Barry Rosen and Yuffie Sorensen, talking about the roadmap for Notes and Domino. The last couple of months, there's been a lot of questions. Where's Notes and Domino going? Is it going to live? Is it going to die? And IBM, in the last month or two, has released a roadmap showing enhancements and support through, I think it was 2021, at least 2021. And so we're going to have Barry and Yuffie talk some more about the roadmap for the ICS products, and in particular Notes and Domino, and what's planned there. And in December, we're tentatively planning on a webinar focused on application modernization options. How do you know what apps you should modernize, and how do you go about doing it? What technologies might be appropriate? So watch our website for more information about that. Also, all of our previous webinars going back the last couple of years are available at the TLCC website, tlcc.com/xpages-webinar. And you can go to our previous webinars, and there's a YouTube recording as well as links to any demo databases and slides. One thing I wanted to point out that IBM, this is that time of year where the nominations for the IBM Champion Program are open through the middle of November. I have links on the slides that you'll get to the nomination form. So if there's someone you think has really helped the community out, people who've been speaking on these webinars, would really encourage you. I mean, a lot of folks like Michael and other folks, Johnny Oldenburger and many others, have been presenting at our webinars for the last year. And I encourage you to kind of recognize the time and effort that they put into preparing for these webinars. We don't pay them. They're doing this because they want to share their knowledge with the community. And the IBM Champion Program is all about that, and recognizing the people like our speakers we've had throughout the year or previous years, who's taken the time to share their knowledge and skills. So I encourage everyone to please go out and select. You can select more than one person. Nominate, some people you think have been helpful to you in the last year, whether it's webinars, user groups, blogs that you might follow, people who contribute to OpenNTF, anything like that. They would definitely appreciate the recognition. Okay, so let's get started with Michael. I attended Michael's session at the MW Lug in Austin, and I thought it would be a great session to have here. Just a word about asking questions. So we're going to take your questions at the end of Michael's presentation. And so what we're going to do is have you ask your questions in the GoToWebinar interface. There's a questions panel. Ask your questions as you have them throughout the webinar, and Paul and I will take your questions and ask Michael verbally at the end of the webinar. So please, as Michael's speaking, as questions come up, type them in so you don't forget about asking them later. And then at the end of the webinar, we should have plenty of time to get to those. Okay, so as I said, Michael Smith is our presenter today. Michael actually works for a real customer, not a business partner, Mutual Boiler. And as I said, I did attend this session on this topic at MW Lug, and I thought he did a great job. So Michael, I'm going to transfer controls over to you, make you the presenter.
Thank you, Howard.
Okay.
I'm just selecting the correct screen here.
Okay, and you sound fine, Michael, just to give you a confirmation.
Great, thank you. So can you see my presentation?
Yep, it looks great.
Okay.
You see your title slide.
Okay, so thank you, Howard, for the introduction. I'm speaking to you from outside of Philadelphia, where it's a balmy 34 degrees this morning, so not quite ready for this cold weather. So I'm talking to you today about XPages and jQuery DataTables. And so where this presentation was kind of born was when I started working here 2 years ago, I was tasked with leading the modernization of a 15-year-old Notes client application that runs the entire business. So we have many databases, with some of them have millions of documents. So what I identified as the first challenge was, how are we going to recreate that view experience that users are used to in interacting with the data in the application? So not through any kind of scientific evaluation, I kind of stumbled upon DataTables, and I started working with that due to its great compatibility with Bootstrap, because we were using Bootstrap to kind of build the framework of our application. So that's kind of how all this was born. So a little bit about me. Howard already gave a little bit of an introduction. I've been developing in Notes and Domino for a long time at this point, so that's why I can only approximate how long it is. So, and as Howard said, I did present a lot of this information at MWLUG. Some of you may have been there, and some of you may have been in my sessions. So you're going to see some information that maybe you've seen before, but I've also been able to incorporate some new information and provide some new demos since MWLUG. And those are available on my blog. And some of the demos that I'm going to be demoing today are actually currently online, so they will be available right away for people who want to check them out. So yeah, I've been developing Notes and Domino for a long time. For many years I was actually a consultant, so even though I'm a client now or a customer, I was a business partner for quite a while. So I did work at some interesting companies. A good example would be Mars Incorporated, where I was able to kind of really work on some cool projects. A good example is a Domino web application that was used in Europe to approve new packaging. So when Christmas M&Ms would come out, for example, the packaging for this would go through a Domino web application for approval. So as Howard said, I'm currently work for Mutual Boiler Re. We are a reinsurance company specializing in equipment breakdown. So really what that means is we are a niche inside of a niche, so very specialized in that area. And as I mentioned, I have a blog. You can find that at xpage.me. And then finally, I am on Twitter at Michael G. Smith. So I want to kind of discuss what I'm set forth as some of the goals for this session and what I hope that people can take away from this. So we're going to start with an introduction to DataTables, and as you will see, DataTables is a very, very big and very, very functional library. So I'm trying to focus on what I think are the important things and the features and functionality that I have used primarily. So this is not a comprehensive overview. And when I say we'd be here all week, we could literally do a webinar every day of the week and touch on many different topics about DataTables. So I want to provide a roadmap to give attendees of this presentation an easy way to take this information and start working in your application right away and use these same concepts that we're discussing. So whether you're taking an existing application and you're starting to put a web front end on it, or you already have an XPages back end in it, whatever, you can take the information in this presentation and apply it pretty quickly. So I'm going to share my experiences and lessons learned. So again, as I said, this was all born out of modernizing an existing Notes application and trying to recreate some of the core functionality that users are used to that's available natively in Notes. And just by virtue of working on this presentation, especially for MWLUG, I kind of learned a lot, because when I started, I did the typical developer thing. You know, you're doing some Google searches and you find code snippet here, code snippet there, you add it in your application, and then as I kind of went through in detail the DataTables website, realized, okay, well maybe I did this wrong or I did that wrong, as well as learning some new tricks. And so finally, hopefully time permitting, I can show you how I took everything that I'm going to discuss today and I turned it into really a custom control that allows me to then, anytime I need to add a view in my application, I can take a custom control, drag it there, whether it's on another custom control or on an XPage, and then tie that into a REST service all through a configuration document. So the idea is try to minimize the number of views that get created, reuse existing views, and make something that's scalable and something that allows view changes to be made without touching the design. So again, finally, you should be able to walk away from this presentation and utilize a lot of the concepts that we're talking about, if I've done my job correctly. So who is this session geared towards? Primarily developers modernizing legacy Notes Domino apps. So I put modernizing in quotes because it seems like over the last few months, all of a sudden modernizing a legacy app is kind of like a dirty term, and I'm not really sure why that happened, because quite frankly, I think pretty much a large percentage of Domino developers are kind of in this bucket where if you still have it in your organization, ultimately you're going to be taking an app that has been, running your business in some way, shape, or form for a while and modernizing it, putting a modern front end on it, starting to use a more modern back end, aka XPages, to kind of, get up to speed with modern times. So the focus of all this is building Notes-like views and embedded views, because if you have a Notes app, chances are you have a lot of views and you have a lot of embedded views. Also, anyone interested in using REST to surface data to a front-end application. These concepts we're talking about, even though the XPages is on the title of the presentation and the demos are using XPages, DataTables can be used with any backend that's delivering REST data. So you are not in any way limited to using the stuff we're talking about today with XPages. So let me just quickly kind of go over the agenda today. I'll be checking the time at various points to make sure I'm not going too slow or too fast. But so we want to talk about what exactly is DataTables, and then why do we want to use DataTables. We'll get started, how to quickly get it into your application and start using it. Start adding some data. We'll talk about the DataTables lifecycle, which is very important. If you are developing in XPages currently, then you've probably developed a familiarity with the XPages lifecycle. Well, DataTables has a similar type of functionality. It's not a one-to-one ratio, but I think you will see some similarities in how that works. Then I want to talk about some advanced configuration topics, and some of these I have posted some blog articles recently about some of these. So I'm going to touch on those here and demo those for you. And then finally, the last two topics here, Domino view management and putting it all together. This is where I referenced creating a scalable infrastructure to easily add views to your application without actually having to go back and create new views on the back end. And being able to hand the controls over to a power user, for example, if they want to change columns and move columns around. Okay, so what is DataTables? Well, at its most simple level, it's a client-side framework or library. It is a jQuery plugin, and it's also huge in a couple senses. Uncompressed, I think it's like 400K. Obviously, you don't want to put an uncompressed file in a production application. It's also huge in functionality. And I may end up saying this multiple times through this presentation, but on more than one occasion, as I started to try to implement a piece of functionality, I thought I was going to have to custom build something. And with just a little bit of digging, as it turned out, there was already some sort of facility for that within DataTables. What it is not the XPages control. So don't get confused with the design element you have in your controls palette to be able to drag and drop that into your application and all of a sudden have the jQuery DataTables functionality. So what does DataTables think of itself? Well, its goal is to enhance accessibility of data in HTML tables. Well, to me, that's a very simple goal, especially with what they seem to have achieved and the amount of functionality available. And my personal definition, simply a great tool for creating domino-like rich views in XPage and web applications. So why is DataTables a good idea to add to your application? Well, first of all, it's very easy to hit the ground running. So you get your source files in there and add them to your theme or add them manually, however you choose to do it. And especially if you already have an HTML table with data in it, you have one line of JavaScript and you have data tables. It integrates very well with Bootstrap. So again, this is how I ended up here, was looking for a grid system that was very compatible with Bootstrap. It helps you further separate your data from your design. So we're going to talk a lot about REST services, and just from a designer standpoint, it helps alleviate having the spaghetti of having all your data, sitting on an XPage, for example, and it makes it for a cleaner development experience. So again, I became more and more impressed with its capabilities as I used DataTables more and more. I think you will too. And as I put all this information out here, it's a way to do things. I'm not dictating to you that this is how you should be doing it. It's just another tool in your toolbox. DataTables is very well documented. Their website, it's very easy to get lost on the DataTables website looking for information. So you can kind of end up a little bit down of a rabbit hole. There's also a lot of good questions asked in the forums. You'll find some on Stack Overflow as well. One thing to keep in mind is you want to try to make sure that if you're pulling examples off the web, that you're using code that was created with version 1.10 or later. So, I'm guilty of using older code, and it is all perfectly compatible. However, it could just get a little confusing when you're doing things one way on one page and another way on another page. DataTables, it's very good at handling basic data types. So if you are feeding it a column that has dates and they're formatted in a typical date fashion, when you go to sort that column, it knows that they are dates and it's going to sort it appropriately based on whatever the format of that date is. So again, DataTables, and this is the overriding theme of this presentation, is a great replacement for views and embedded views in your application. Something to keep in mind, and gives you a little bit of a performance boost, is if you're using, especially if you're using Bootstrap tabs. So in my application, almost every page has tabs in it, and Bootstrap tabs. So, and in some cases there are multiple embedded views on that page. And so one of the great things, and this is not specific to DataTables but web development in general, is when you go to click on it, you don't load the data on a particular tab until you click it. So if someone opens that page and they never go to that tab, you never load that data and put that extra stress on the server. So getting started. So if you want to add the files to your project, everything here is fairly typical. You can point to the CDN. You can add the files directly in your NSF in the web content folder. Me personally, I maintain a resources NSF, and all of the resource files that I use in my application are stored there. So if I want to, in which I recently started using the most recent version of DataTables, all I had to do was add it to the resources database and change my theme to point to that. Another advantage of doing things that way is if you're doing design replace and you have your application with all your XPages and your custom controls and your resources, it can make for a much longer design replace and a more complicated design replace. And Obviously, there's going to be an impact there if you're using source control. So as far as dependencies, you need jQuery 1.7 or later. So again, this is jQuery DataTables. They are separate entities, but DataTables is dependent on jQuery. And so in the demos I'm showing today, I'm actually using an older version of DataTables. It was only in the last week or two that I started using the most recent version, and I will get into why a little further down the presentation. Okay, so you've downloaded DataTables, you've added the source files. What's it going to look like? Well, there's a default DataTables look, but it's also, again, very compatible with Bootstrap. So all you have to do to focus on the Bootstrap look and feel is add a reduced DataTables CSS file to your theme. And then you're going to use the Bootstrap classes when you are building your table. There's other frameworks that are supported, Foundation, jQuery UI. I personally have not used either of these, so I can't speak to how well they work. And then finally, DataTables does have a theme creator. So if you have a specific corporate brand and you want to model DataTables to match that, there is a tool to do that. Okay, so we want to add the appropriate source files to our theme. If you're going to use the core DataTables, you just need your DataTable CSS, jQuery, which you may have there already, and then the DataTables JS file. If you're using Bootstrap, again, you already have your Bootstrap there. You have your jQuery there, so then you need to add your DataTables Bootstrap CSS, your Bootstrap JS, which again is already there, and your DataTables JS file. So how do we actually put data into DataTables? Well, from the actual docs online, you have 3 different locations where you can get data. So you have HTML. So you may already have a static HTML table on a page, and you just want to give it some nice look and feel and some functionality. You can load data via JavaScript array. Or finally, this is probably the most important, and again, if you are going to be using REST services, this is going to be your best option. You want to load data via AJAX in JSON format. So let's take a simple repeat and apply DataTables to it, see what it looks like, and then we'll add some styling to it and kind of see the progression of what happens when we do a couple different things. So I'm going to be popping out here, and so again, here's my demo database. So if I'm creating a repeat with no style or anything, I get pretty much just a basic table here. There's no, looks like there's not even any padding. So we haven't applied DataTables to this view yet. So I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between the presentation and the demo, so bear with me. So what does the markup look like for a repeat? So again, if you're already developing an XPage, this is all going to be very familiar to you. So on the left side here, we just have a very simple table. You can see we've added our table head, and then we just have a repeat, which is going to generate our rows for us. And here's how the actual markup looks. And then finally, we're going to apply DataTables to that basic repeat that we just saw just by creating one line. So just by creating that one line of client-side JavaScript, we're able to kind of just get some default formatting. So what DataTables does is it kind of examines your data a little bit and tries to use some intelligence to determine how big the actual columns should be. Okay, so okay. So let's take a look at some of the default settings here on DataTables. So at the top left corner of the screen and also on the bottom right corner of the screen, we have paging. So my personal preference is to not use paging. I prefer to try to get all the data I need out there. And what I found is users tend to not like paging, and then, of course, if you're familiar with view control paging or repeat paging, you know what some of the nightmares are involved with that. Bottom left corner of the screen, and this is all DataTables lingo that I'm using here. So this is the info block, which tells you how many records there are. And the top right screen is a search. And so an important thing to understand about this search box is, by default, what this actually is doing is it's filtering the data that has already come back from the server. So if you have a pager set up and you have 10 pages, when you search for a term in here, it's going to filter through those 10 pages. By default, it is not in any way going back to the server and doing any kind of search. Now, as we get into more advanced stuff, that is something that could easily be done, where you add an event handler to the search box that takes your query and goes back to the server and does a full text search or gets documents by key or whatever your preference is. And so to see this search in action, one of the great things about DataTables, and this is a feature that my users really love, and is definitely an advantage over searching in a regular notes view. Obviously, we only have 10 records here, but still, if I had, say, 500 or 1,000 records here, and I was looking for a particular piece of data, as I type in this search box, it's just going to automatically filter the data that does not apply to that search term. So when it is doing that search, it is just a straight text search. So, you know, if I search for West, it's searching across all the columns. So you can see this record has West Virginia in the address, so it's going to filter that. I could also filter on the last 4 of the phone number. So that is really one of the big wins for DataTables out of the chute as you add it to your application. Okay, so when we just added DataTables to this repeat, we had a one-liner basically saying, okay, just give me all the defaults that DataTables is going to throw at me. So coming back to this screen, we might not want all this stuff showing up on our view. So fortunately, DataTables has a very easy way of having some control over this stuff. So these are the options that are available to you when you initiate your data table. So what I'm going to do So let me try to show you how you would do that real quick. So this XPage I'm updating here is not actually the live demo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to update this, update the actual demo database on another computer, and then refresh it for you so you can see the changes. Actually, I take that back. I can show the changes here on this screen, so bear with me. So If I wanted to turn some of these features off that we just saw from the default DataTables configuration, I just come in here, so I'm going to add those 3 configuration options, build my application, and now I can come back here. Whoops, I guess I updated the wrong one. Okay, we got our pager turned off. So this is what happens when you try to do demos on 2 computers. But what those options do is they actually remove the pager, the info, and the search box. Actually, this is why. Sorry about that. So, but I think you get the idea there. We're talking about some pretty basic configuration. So, okay, so with the configuration options, I think as you are adding data tables to your application, you're going to focus on a handful here. So you probably saw me typing in paging, searching, info, ordering I did not do anything with, but you might not want to give users the ability to sort the columns. So in that case, you would turn ordering off. And then what I'm finding for me is probably has become the most important option is scroll wide. And I realize that makes probably little sense right now, but as we get further down and talk about some of the advanced configuration, I will explain to you why this has become very important. Okay, so we've seen the default. You see there's really, in terms of style, there's not a lot going on here. Let me get to the right database. That would probably help. That's because I'm on. I guess it would help to point to the correct demo database now, wouldn't it? Here we go. Here's the effect I was looking for in the previous screen. So I turned off the pagers, I turned off the info, I left the searching intact, and that's just a simple demonstration of how you can easily change some of the configuration on here. So now let's talk about adding some style. So how do we do that? We simply add some classes to our markup. What are the classes that are available to us? You can use, you can see here in the first item in the list, you can use display. What that's going to do is that's going to give you an actual shortcut and having to avoid using some of the other classes. Hover is going to give you mouse over. Row border is actually, so the screen you're looking at here actually has row border turned on as well as striping. So again, just like with the actual configuration options, as far as styles go, these are probably the most common that you're going to use. And it's important to note that if you're using row border or cell border, they are mutually exclusive, so you have to use one or the other. So by applying some style and some classes to a data table, we're going to turn this into this. Since it's an online presentation, I don't know if the colors are coming through or not. You might not see the actual row striping. So let's take a look at that. So hopefully it's not too small to see, but really it's just as simple as adding these classes to your table. If you're using Bootstrap, then you're going to use the Bootstrap classes. So you're going to use like table. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but you're going to get a similar look and feel. However, one difference you'll notice is the actual icons that are used for sorting are a little bit different. Me personally, I use the core DataTables CSS. Okay, so we took a look at taking a simple repeat with some fairly basic data and just trying to turn it from a basic HTML table into something with a little more functionality. So, but now for the rest of the presentation, we're going to focus on loading data via REST. So how exactly do we do that? So in our data tables initialization, you can see we have some other options down here. We talked about ordering, searching, and paging. We'll be talking about columns very shortly, because when you're loading data via REST, the columns object becomes the most important piece of that. But to get the actual data, we're now pointing data tables to a REST service via the AJAX option. So if you are sending REST data to data tables, what is it expecting? Well, it's expecting either an array of arrays. Again, pay special attention to the columns object, because if you're going to load data via REST, you're going to have to get to know the columns object very well. So the columns object must be defined, or the markup must contain the table head with the cells defined for each column of data that you're bringing in. There is a downside to that. So this is why you may want to focus on JSON data. So again, columns object must be defined. And just in case you're not getting the message, the columns object is really, really important. So a big reason why you would opt for JSON over the array of arrays is it then becomes harder to work programmatically with data loaded via an array, because then you have to, if you want to reference a specific row or a specific column in a row, then you have to get into knowing exactly what the index is of that piece of data you want. Versus JSON, you can start referencing things by the actual field name. So let's talk about the columns object and define it a little bit here. So so we have a couple screenshots here. If we're loading data via an array, we need one object per column. So you can see down here we have a columns array, and we simply have an object here with a title. So that title is going to go into the table header, and in the zero-based index of the array of data that comes in, it's expecting the name to be there. So again, with no data field, the order of objects must correspond to the order of the return data. Over here on the right side, you can use the data field to supply the index where data tables should get that column from. So you can see here these are actually swapped out, but because we have the index, data tables will know what to do with it. Here's how your markup might look if you're using an array of array. You must have the table head element and the columns defined, as we said. Order matters. Now, if you're going to load data via JSON, via an array of objects, again, I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, but the columns object must be defined. So you can see here we've added another element to our columns object. So we now, in the data element, we're actually pointing to an incoming field of the rest data. So in this case, order is not going to matter at all. And so here's an example of the data that might be coming in from a REST service. So here we're saying in the address column, get the data from the address field. Okay, so how are we going to get REST data from Domino into data tables? Well, the quickest and easiest way is to use the Vue JSON service, which is you have that control in your palette, and you can drag it onto your XPage, or in my case, I have a separate database which just has the REST services in it, and then you can start to configure it. So the pros of doing this are very easy to hit the ground running. So you drag it in there, you provide some quick configuration, the database where the data is, the view you're getting it from, and maybe you don't want to get the default columns or whatever it is, but it's very easy to quickly create a REST service. Domino is going to handle the data serialization for you, so you don't have to worry about doing that. As you see, when we use some of the other options, those are some things you have to take into consideration. The downside to this is it's more difficult to fine-tune the data that you're getting back from the REST service. So if you have already started configuring REST services, the Vue JSON service, then it's kind of like you can get all the columns in the view, or if you actually want to take the time to choose which columns, it can be a bit tedious. So it's also not good from a scalability standpoint. So to then have to go in and create a separate REST service for each different view can be, again, a little tedious and kind of making some additional work for yourself. So the markup for the Vue JSON service, very simple. Key information is the path info. That is how, as you are making that call, you can have one XPage and have 100 REST services on it. But the path info is how XPages in the backend is going to actually know which one to retrieve data for. And so here's an example of how this would look. So this is a very basic example of getting REST data for data tables. So on the left side, this is the entire markup of the XPage. So you can see where we have a script block, we have a function, REST basic, and our function, we have our columns defined. In the Ajax block here, we're going out and we're getting our REST service by the path name. It lives on a rest.xsp XPage. And that's it. It's pretty simple. So if we're going to look at a quick demo of that, so that very little bit of markup, this very little bit of markup here and one function call gives us this kind of nice looking view here. The next most typical way of getting REST data is through creating a custom REST service. So the pros of this versus the Vue.json service is you're going to have more granular control over the information coming back from the server. Easier to define the column definitions. So back in this example, we define the columns in our client-side JavaScript. You know, for an enterprise application, that's a bit messy, you know, non-intuitive to someone who may be learning the application, coming in new. But through a custom REST service, we have more control. So, but again, the cons of that are you need to be very aware of the data types, especially dates. And you need to actually write the code that's going to build the data and send it back to the client. So here's an example of what the markup would look like for creating a custom REST service. So you have a doGet parameter here, and we're just calling a server-side JavaScript function. And this is our actual server-side JavaScript function. So again, we're saying on a get, call this function, get array data. And so an important piece of this I want to point out is so far when we looked at getting, whether it's array data or JSON data, we're defining the columns at the client level. Through this method, we're defining the columns at the server level. So all the heavy lifting is being done on the server, and this is where you can get into maybe you're defining your columns in configuration documents somewhere, and then when you're calling this function, you're passing a parameter, and you're then pulling that configuration that you already have stored somewhere. And so let me try to show what that might look like. See if I can find the right. Okay, so I haven't done anything with this table to give it the proper formatting or anything like that. It's simply to demonstrate what you're going to get back when calling a custom REST service. And the important thing to view here is in Firebug. So bear with me, it's going to be might be a little hard to read. So if we look at the actual response that comes back. So down here, we are sending the columns configuration as a separate object in the payload that's coming back from the server. So this is how we're telling DataTables to configure the table. So everything above here is all the actual data. This is the data that's creating the table. The columns down here, this is the configuration. And so you can see in the console, as we expand some of these options, and these are actual, this is how DataTables is taking that data stream and putting it into its own DataTables objects. So let's see if we can find a Okay, so I actually have my configuration in here. So you can see we're simply making an AJAX call here to get the data first, and then when we successfully get the data, then we're making our data table call. So we're getting the data before we initialize our data table, and we're handing it to data table. So when we do that, we're pulling that columns configuration out of that data stream. So again, this is to illustrate the difference of configuring your columns on the client side versus the server side, and where a lot of that flexibility comes in. And if you have a view that has 30 columns but you only need 5, this makes it very easy to minimize the amount of data coming back, especially if you have a large amount of records. So of course, in addition to the view JSON service and the custom REST service, you can also use an XAgent. The pros of that are going to be similar to the custom REST service. So maybe you get even more granular control than you would with the custom REST service. And so really these are the same pros. As far as cons, again, the same. So it might be 6 to 1, half a dozen to another in terms of using the custom REST service and the XAgent. So the DataTables lifecycle. This is where you really get into the power that's available to you in DataTables, and where you kind of go beyond just creating a basic table with some simple column sorting and that type of stuff. So this is how you start to get to recreating those notes-like views that your users are going to want to see. So we're going to use callbacks to enhance our view experience. So, and again, I'm highlighting the key, what I consider to be the key callbacks that you're going to use. The init complete, exactly as it looks on the screen when your DataTables is done initializing, any code that is in this callback is going to get executed. Draw callback, anytime the table gets redrawn. So as we delve further into this lifecycle here, you're going to see similar to the XPages lifecycle, where for example, you see the render response phase execute multiple times in a request. Especially if you're loading REST data, you're going to see the draw callback phase get executed multiple times in DataTables. So, and then we have row callback and created row. These are important when you want to provide row specific functionality, click, double click, etc. And so as I mentioned, there are similarities to the XPages lifecycle. And you also want to be cognizant of your users, and what I mean is it's very easy as a developer to load them up with bells and whistles, and really when it comes to this stuff, sometimes your imagination is your limit in terms of what you can provide to your users creatively, but sometimes you kind of have to pull the reins on yourself so you don't slow down their browser, depending on what types of machines they have, what version of IE, etc. So again, just a screenshot here of all the callbacks that are available to you as you are initializing your data table. And so let's take a look at a demo. Okay, the first lifecycle demo I want to illustrate is using a repeat. So, because what you're going to see is when you so with a repeat, as we saw, your data is already there. So DataTables is just taking your existing data and putting some stuff around it. With loading data via REST, then DataTables is a little bit more involved in how that data is going to be formatted. So you're going to see more activity in the REST lifecycle than the repeat lifecycle. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this page. Okay, so you can see the created row callback got called 100 times because I don't have my info turned on, but we have 100 rows of data here. Same with row callback. Header callback, info callback, and our draw callback, and our init complete. So you see all this stuff ran before the actual init complete callback ran. So a lot of these are basic callbacks, so so you see, even though we're calling the callbacks, we're not really doing anything. So we're just logging to the console every time we call these callbacks. So let's look at a callback when we're loading data via REST, and we're going to see a big difference. This table only has 25 records, so the created row and the row callback are only getting called 25 times. However, what you're going to notice is draw callback has now been executed multiple times, info callback has been executed multiple times, header callback, etc. So we're getting a lot more activity when we're loading data via REST. Again, you'll see similarities to the XPages lifecycle if you are familiar with that. So let's start talking about some advanced configuration topics. I think we're doing pretty good on time. So what are some of the things that we're going to take a look at here? So obviously, if you're creating a view, typically you're going to want someone to double-click or click records and then have something happen, whether it's open a document or what have you. And we're going to take a look at renderers. So renderers, along with the callbacks, those are the framework for providing that rich view experience. And renderers are huge and possibly the most important piece of functionality in DataTables. We're going to take a look at programmatic filtering. So, for example, someone clicks a button somewhere and you need something to happen to a data table. You need to filter the data programmatically. Inserting new rows. So if you start out with a small data set, but you give users the ability to go out and get more data, whether it's scrolling or clicking more, that type of stuff. Categorization. This is kind of a big one in that as developers, we tend to, as we're moving to the web, try to avoid adding categorization, or maybe you create a combo box and have users filter a view based on that. But there's actually, even though it's not natively built into data tables, we can actually provide categorization pretty easily. Reloading data. So we're all used to the blue squirrely in the top left corner of the view to reload data, and DataTables has an easy way to do that. Another big topic, fixed table headers. So again, if you are, as you're moving to the web, and as you start creating grids and views, and as the number of records in those grow, ultimately someone's going to say, hey, can you make the column headers freeze? So I kind of, again, in preparation for these presentations, it kind of helped me come up with a great way to easily create fixed table headers and data tables, and we'll talk about some of the different options for that. View column icons. This is one of those native pieces of functionality that users are used to in Notes. And then a server column resort. So some of the feedback I got from the MWLUG presentation was I didn't really touch on the server aspect of stuff. So I did want to try to include a demo demonstrating clicking a column and going back and resorting on the server and getting the data back. So we'll take a look at that. And then finally, error handling. So I think I mentioned that I just started using the most recent version of DataTables, because the version I currently have in production does not have the enhanced error handling. The newer version does, and so we'll try to talk on that and the benefits of that. And then finally, if we have enough time, demonstrating using DataTable as a pick list. Okay, so adding click events. You want to use, so we just took a look at the life cycle. We saw the created row event and the row callback event. So these are the callbacks you want to use to add that functionality. DataTables in their own documentation says use created row, and this should result in better browser performance. From personal experience, when I first started creating clickable rows, I was not using these events. I was actually adding jQuery event listeners outside of the DataTables configuration. So I think what that was leading to was a lot of leftover JavaScript objects being left in the browser and slowing the browser down, etc. Be aware when double-clicking, the click event is also fired. This is not a DataTables issue. This is just typical browser behavior. All right, so let's look at a demo for click events. Okay, so again, it's the same view we keep seeing over and over again here, but we're just kind of adding some more functionality to it. So you see up here I have a field. Right now it's empty, no document selected, but as I start to click around, you can see that I'm getting the doc ID of the underlying document. So again, this is, especially when we're creating notes views, this is where DataTables is great, because as you are sending the data back via REST, the unique ID is included in that, and DataTables just kind of holds on to it. Even if you're not displaying it, DataTables is holding on to it, and it's there if you need it. So that way we can reference it via the @UNID field name that is in the JSON stream, and so that way if I wanted to open up one of these documents, in this case I just have my double-click event set to alert the unique ID here, but it's very easy, and I do this a lot in my application. I double-click a record, and I open the corresponding XPage for that record based on that unit. So let's take a quick look at what that code looks like. So again, a lot of pretty much all of these demos are very simple demos, and they're very easy to recreate with minimal code. So in our click function here, we have our columns definition, and then we're initializing our data table. And that's it. All this code has everything that we need. So again, within the created row callback, using jQuery, I can simply add a double click, and I can add a click, and then have those do whatever I need them to do. And again, so all of these demos are online, and you know, I can type the URL into the chat at the end of the session, or you can find them on my blog, and you can just pull the code right out of the CSJS file. It's all there for you. Okay, renderers. Now we can really get into some fun stuff. This is where your data tables can take off. So just an example of a way that I use a renderer in a current application is when users mouse over a particular value in the view, you get a Bootstrap pop-up with additional information. So that additional information is not necessarily displayed in the view, but it's there if you mouse over a particular value. So as I said before, possibly the most powerful aspect of data tables. Renderers are executed whenever data tables needs to get the data for a cell in a column. So again, going back to what I said about be cognizant of your users, it's very easy to be like a kid in a candy store and supply all this cool functionality that you can imagine in your head. So this function is going to be called multiple times because it has to display it for some of the different phases of the table creation. So you have display, which is what users are going to see. There's going to be the sorting phase. So maybe you have a column that has the word 1 or the word 2, but for sorting purposes, you actually want it to sort by 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then filtering. So again, another example where you want to give users additional ways to search for data besides just what they see in a particular column on the screen. And so what that is that's orthogonal data. Each data point has the ability to take multiple forms. Okay, so let's take a look at a renderer. Okay, so what I did with this particular demo is I added a column called Zodiac, and so based on the birthday, I'm computing this person's zodiac sign. So, so how did we go about doing that? Should we take a look at one thing here? I think I got a little ahead of myself there. Apologize for the clicking around. Okay. So to get that zodiac sign, when we create a renderer, we saw previously when we were defining our columns object, we have the data field, we have the title field, and now we have an additional field called render. And here's where you can pass an inline function. You can also call a function specifically. And if we look back at the presentation here, you can see we have different phases that the renderer takes a look at. So within the render here, every time DataTables looks at call birthday text, it's going to go through these different one of these phases. So first, the filter. So what I tend to want to do is, in this case, so even though the zodiac is listed in the view, the idea was I could put April in the search box and have it filter on the Aries, for example. Sort by the month name, but for display, show the zodiac sign. So this is an example of using orthogonal data where you're displaying the zodiac sign, but if someone does a search for a month, it's going to pull up everybody with a birthday in that month. So you can see here is just kind of like a blown up view of that. Okay, so let's talk about filtering programmatically. The API gives you a lot of power that you can tap into. Some things to keep in mind here. If you do perform some sort of action programmatically, you have to call the draw event. And of course, if you call the draw event, it's going to call the draw callback. So let's take a look at a demo for this. Okay, so for this demo, when the page loads, I'm actually creating a drop-down that contains all the states so that I can, of course, I can just come over here to the filter and filter based on state like that. But if you have, a phrase like MA is going to show up in a lot of places other than just the state field. So instead I created a drop-down which builds a list of states based on the data that's in the table. And you see this is not sorted. I forgot to sort that, but just by choosing an option from the drop-down here, I can have it show me only the rows where Florida is in the state field. So how do we do that? First thing we do is in the init complete callback, we create the dropdown. I'm sorry, we have an empty dropdown available to us already. We just get a handle on that and then populate it with the options. So again, not a lot of code here to do a lot of this stuff. And then what happens is an event handler on the dropdown. Simple piece of client-side JavaScript. I call the search. So again, there's just a couple lines of code here. I get a handle on the data table. I tell DataTables, okay, search in column 3 for the value that's in the dropdown, and then redraw the table. That's all we're doing there to go from here to here. Again, very, very simple stuff.
Hey, Michael. This is Howard. We have about 5 minutes left, so we can have a couple minutes for questions.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, trying to see. Sure, that's fine. Yeah. So do you want me to continue for 5 minutes? Is that what you're saying?
If you want to, yeah, if you have a few more things to show, or if you want to just take, maybe one or two of the things on your list there that you thought were best to show, and then we got a couple questions lined up. So we'll have 5 minutes for that.
Okay. So yeah, I'll go through quickly just a couple things here that I think are important. Again, I talked about categorization. It's not built in, but it's very easy to implement. So what I do is I use Font Awesome a lot. So I try to use Font Awesome for any icon that I'm using. So you can see here we're creating a very similar look and feel to the type of functionality we have in Notes. So I'll just try to highlight quickly how that is accomplished. So in the draw callback, sound kind of, it's like Austin Powers saying that. I'll allow myself to introduce myself. We're getting into the API and we're traversing the table, and when we find all the records that are of a particular category based on the value we're supplying as saying, hey, this is the category column, we're grouping them together and we're inserting some additional rows and adding the Font Awesome icon and providing click events on that. So, and the good thing is if I search, everything remains intact. So that is categorization. Again, if you take a look at the online demos, you can see pretty easily how this stuff is accomplished. Reloading data, I think I could skip over that. I think that's going to be pretty easy. Fixed headers, this is a big one. So let me quickly show you what I came up with to accomplish this. So DataTables has an extension for fixed headers. It requires loading additional resources. I was using that. I had this very hacked together bit of code to implement that the way I wanted to, depending on if I had multiple tables on a page or whatever. And then I stumbled across using scroll Y. So what scroll Y does is it tells DataTables to stretch to a certain height. I set scroll Y to 0, and then I compute the size of the scroll body that gets created. And so to see that in action, so you see all of our previous demos, our headers were not fixed, our footer was not fixed. So now as we're scrolling through data, those items are intact. And so really not a lot of code to accomplish that. I have a function here that's really, it's actually half as many lines. You can see I have a lot of console statements in there when I was debugging. But the idea is, if you're recreating a view, typically that view is going to occupy pretty much the entire screen. So it's easy to compute the height you need and adjust things from there. And then also, if you have an embedded view, if you supply a container saying, hey, I want my view to fit in this container, you can do the same thing. You can just make the calculations you need and have everything look correct from there. So just an example of that in action is I have two tables here that both have fixed headers. They're both contained into different containers. So that is not out on my blog yet, but hopefully I will have it out there shortly. And unfortunately, we're out of time, and I wasn't able to show you my my enterprise implementation of all this. But again, that's something that I'm hoping to have out on my blog shortly, and have it downloadable and usable by whoever wants it. So with that being said, I think I will turn it over to you, Howard.
All right, great, Michael. Thanks. A lot of information there, and appreciate that. It looks like a real nice enhancement to some of the ways many folks been presenting view data. Let me make myself a presenter here. Okay, just a reminder to ask questions, use the GoToWebinar questions panel. And so before we get into your questions, just a reminder about a couple upcoming events. One that just popped up is there's going to be a Canada user group in several cities, and I think they're also going to have a virtual option on November 17th. We'll have information about that in our next newsletter, as well as an event in Milan, Italy. And of course, Connect is going to be in San Francisco this year in February. So Paul, do you have some questions lined up? Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, Michael, is your demo database on your blog as well?
It is, yes. So there's kind of two things there. There are the live demos, which is up to date with all the recent work I've done. The demo database, the downloadable database, needs to be updated with some of that, but it might even be just as easy to just take a look at the live demos and extract what you need from there.
Okay, and also the recording of this will be available in a link we'll send out to everyone who registered in the next couple of days, as well, along with the slides from Michael. And I assume those slides will have the links to your blog and the demos and everything.
Yeah, there is a link to the blog, but yeah, I do need to add a couple. Thanks for reminding me.
Okay, great. Paul, do you have a question lined up?
Yes, Michael, a question from Saba. Do you see any performance difference between using a custom REST service and a standard JSON service?
I have not evaluated the performance of those two. The one thing where I have evaluated performance is using REST versus a repeat. As you get into 100 records and then even more into the hundreds of records, the performance is dramatically better with a REST service. But I have not compared the performance of those two. I think really it's going to come down to what exactly are you doing in your custom REST service. So if you're just simply traversing data, I'm going to assume it's going to be pretty similar. But if you're doing a lot with that data inside that custom REST service, you're going to see a slowdown, I would assume.
Okay, we have a question from Kevin. If you wanted to combine data from multiple views into one data table, what would you suggest?
That's a great question, and actually I do that myself. So we have data sets that are the same but in separate databases, and in the old notes world they would be in separate views and separate embedded views. What I do is I initialize my data table, and then in the init complete phase I actually make another AJAX call to another REST service and pull that additional data in, and then simply use the data tables insert rows functionality, and it actually works really, really well. The important thing to keep in mind with that is the data sets need to match. So what I do is I create the view in one database that I'm using for that, and then I copy it into the other database so I know that they match perfectly.
Okay, but then if you wanted to combine data for, let's say, a person and get data from one database and then also from another, I guess then you could do that in your REST service, either Java or JavaScript, right?
You could do that as well. So yes, you could on the back end. So that really kind of ties into the previous question as well. So in your custom REST service, if you wanted to tie those records together on the server side, you could certainly do that. It might not get there as fast.
Okay.
I have a question from Jennifer. How do you format the dates?
Well, by default, if you're using typical date format, DataTables is going to pick it up. Now, at the view level, I tend to, if I'm using the typical month, day, year, I tend to format my dates as text at the view level because I know that DataTables is going to format those properly for me. Really, I guess it comes down to your needs. What I find with the default date implementation, so if you have a date column, if you were to look at the data as it comes back from the REST service in Firebug or Chrome Developer Tools, you'll see it's that I forget what the spec is, but like the 7601 or something like that. And DataTables kind of chokes on that because there's some sort of JavaScript bug with that. It's not necessarily a DataTables error. I believe there's a JavaScript bug of some sort.
Okay, and then here's a question from Chris. Have you tried creating a custom control where you just kind of pass in a view name and then let it kind of do all the heavy lifting that you could then share among different XPages?
Yes, actually, unfortunately, I ran out of time, and I was gonna demo that, but I have a very big back-end implementation that does exactly that. So, for example, in the browser, I can create views on the fly and then simply pass a key to a custom control, and that custom control is able to then build the column configuration. It goes out and gets the data, and everything is done with minimal designer interaction. So that I would say keep an eye out on my blog, that I'm going to be publishing some articles about that and making that implementation available. I need to finish stripping away some corporate specific stuff out of that before I can make it available to the public. But yeah, the idea is minimize the number of your back-end views and just make it easy to implement and update any view changes without actually having to touch the view.
Okay, good. Sounds like a good OpenNTF project. And one last question we'll take from Jennifer. Let's say you had data only a particular user was allowed to see. Would you suggest using a custom REST service as opposed to the view JSON service?
Well, it depends. If there are readers fields and they're limited to that data via that method, then I think it's not going to make a difference. So the server, as long as they're authenticated and they're not an anonymous user, they're going to get the data that only they can see. So I don't think it's going to make a difference in that standpoint.
Okay. Yep. Domino security always rules. Okay, so I think we're out of questions for the most part, or at least we're out of time. And so going to thank Michael and for your time and effort in presenting today and preparing for this. I know it takes a lot of time to get ready for this, and also like to thank Paul and Courtney, my co-hosts, for helping out today. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. And for our Jewish participants, I hope you have a good Yom Kippur tomorrow. Have a great day.